No, I want a green screen. That's better. Don't know how to reverse my screen. Let's see, what's this? No, I don't want to do that either. So I've got two bottles here from a company called River Roots Barrel Company, based out of Cleveland, Ohio. So let's take a look at this one first. So this is called the King Triton Ruler of the Parkas. So let's get into some of the details here. There's a barrel number here, so it's a single barrel. 14 years of age, 59.4% ABV, which is 118.8 proof. So let's see if we can get a little bit more information on the back. As a typical government warning, and then it says distilled in Indiana, River Roots Barrel Company, Cleveland, Ohio. So you could say to yourself, wait a minute, it says River Roots Barrel Company, Cleveland, Ohio, but it's distilled in Indiana. So let's break that down. So what that River Roots is, there's two ways to look at this. You can consider them an NDP, a non-distilling producer, or an independent bottler. Those terms are not exactly interchangeable, but I think in this example they are. So a non-distilling producer, if you think of it that way, it's exactly what it says. So they're producing, I don't know, producers, it should be really a non-distilling bottler, would probably be a better term, because they are bottling barrels of whiskey that they source from other companies. And in this particular case, they're sourcing from MGP, the powerhouse distilling production company in Indiana. So non-distilling producer means that they went to MGP, or MGP came to them with some samples, and they selected, this barrel club selected this 14-year, it's probably a 95.5 rye. I don't know that for fact. I don't have a mash bill on here. But they basically, so this company in Cleveland sourced a barrel that was distilled, aged, and produced and aged in Indiana. They barreled it, they bottled it, and they sold it as River Roots. So it's kind of an interesting, interesting take on things. So if this were a Scotch, it would say MGP, or Ross and Squibb Distillery. In the United States, they don't necessarily have to have that level of transparency. So you can discern, typically, if it's going to be 14-year rye, it's probably Midwest MGP Ingredients Incorporated, but it doesn't really say it. I have an issue with that, but it's a minor issue because this is really good. So this is one. Now this is another one. So let's take a look at this bottle. Barrel 177. This is a 13-year rye. Comes in at 108.6 proof, and again, you have the typical government warning, and it says distilled in Indiana. So it says the same thing. So you could look at both of these and think, well, how are they the same and how are they different? So they're the same because they come from the same, they are being sold by the same company, the River Roots Barrel Company out of Cleveland. We also know that they're being sourced from Indiana. Again, I can make a good assumption that both of these are coming from the Ross and Squibb Distillery. But having said that, they're completely different barrels, completely different ages. I don't know, there's no rickhouse information here or anything like that. So, the thing, let's say if you compare to a Scotch, where are all my Scotches? Oh, here. All right, for example. So let's take a look, let's compare it to Scotch. So this is Whiskey Craft, right? So Whiskey Craft would be analogous, that's the company that's selling, that bottled this and is selling it, would be analogous to River Roots here. But if you look right below that, it says Highland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey distilled at Isle of Jura Distillery. And that's the information that you don't necessarily get so often in the US. So, and this is actually incredible. So this is a Jura, we know this comes from the Jura Distillery. Here's another one up here. This is a whiskey sponge So Whiskey Sponge is the company that's bottling and selling it, but it says distilled at the Ben Nevis Distillery. So if I had to ask for, let's say, going into 2026 for American independent bottlers, it would be, and the companies obviously where they're getting the barrels from, I'd love to see more transparency. There may be legal reasons, maybe MGP doesn't want their name on there, or let's say they're sourcing, you could source these from any place, you could source these from Wild Turkey, and maybe there's an issue there. But I think that's a mistake. I do. I think that, I don't think this detracts from Ben Nevis because it comes from Ben Nevis. And I don't think, like, for example, if they source something from Wild Turkey or Buffalo Trace or Heaven Hill or wherever it was, I just I don't get it. I know maybe they're worried about protecting their brand, but to me, if you're going to get a really nice bottle that says, distilled and aged at Wild Turkey Distillery, bottled by River Roots, theoretically, that's not what this says. I think it would just give you more information. So I don't know if you like Scotch, and I'm a big Scotch guy, but independent bottlers in Scotland have a lot of transparency, and I think that's important so that you know exactly where this comes from, because you may say, well, I really like the company Whiskey Sponge, but I don't know what's in the bottle. Like maybe it's a distillery that I don't care for. So I think that what Scotland's doing, I think, is really interesting. Whereas, again, in the U.S., and don't get me wrong, I think next year, 2026, if I have to make a prediction, and if I have a short that I just put out on YouTube about this, but if I had to make a prediction, I would say next year is going to be the rise of the independent bottler. Why? Because there's a lot of extra stock. We know, like, for example, Jim Beam's cutting production. There's some companies that have gone bankrupt. So there is a glut of barrels, and those barrels are expensive. You got to pay for the warehouse. You got to pay for the real estate. You got to pay for the storage and the upkeep. And if they're just sitting there, you're losing money. And I think that means that probably those barrels are going to start to become supply and demand. I think the barrel prices are going to start to come down. Independent bottlers are going to swoop in, bottle that stuff, sell it, in great packaging, profiling incredibly old whiskeys like these 14-year MGPs. And I think then for let's say the enthusiast or the average collector of whiskey of any type, I think 2026 is the year to kind of get off the worrying about so much about the BTAC and the Pappies and that kind of stuff, and start to look out for this insanely good whiskey that's coming out of these independent bottlers. So companies like River Roots, what else do we have here? Lost Lantern. This is an insane hazmat rich grain distilling, and you could see it again right on the bottle. This is transparent. This Lost Lantern is great because Lost Lantern's the company that's bottling it, but it says single distillery series rich grain distilling company. So just like in the Scottish model, you know exactly where this is coming from. So I'd love to see more of that. Having said that, I think next year you're going to see, and you've seen it this year, like with companies like the Augusta Distillery and their Buckners. This is not above Turkey, but they're sourcing from big time the distilleries. I don't know, but again, I don't know where this comes from. And our limited release whiskey, they're kind of taking ownership of it, but it's really not their whiskey. They're bottling it. Barrel, bottle number, there's the proof. But other than that, I have the foggiest idea where this Buckner's, where this is sourced from. And I think that's important because, again, does it come from Wild Turkey? Does it come from Heaven Hill? There's certain distilleries I like their profiles more than others. So I think the consumer is a little bit more in the dark here with the American model than with the Scottish model. So it's just something to think about. I think when you're thinking about buying your whiskey, it's kind of nice to know where it comes from. Now, there's another option, and I certainly would be hesitant to buy a single barrel product from a store that doesn't give you a sample to taste, because you can get single barrels. You can get single barrels from the same distillery that are great, and then you can get other ones that are complete stinkers. And I think that's important too. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a hot take on where I think the trends are going next year, and a little bit more information for you about single barrels too. So cheers.